Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's Farm to School Purchasing Grant Orientation and Training webinar. My name is Claire Finnerty, and I'm the Farm to School Purchasing Grant Specialist with the Washington State Department of Agriculture's Farm to School program. So this webinar is for grantees who have been awarded funding for the Farm to School Purchasing Grants. And the grant program is made possible by the Washington State Legislature and longtime partners and advocates who have been pushing for this investment for many years. So this webinar is being recorded, and you'll have access to it in your WSDA grant portal. So please keep your microphones off during the call. You can keep your cameras on or off, whatever you prefer. And like I said, the slides and the recording will be in your WSDA grant portal as well as in an email. So there will be time for questions at the end of the presentation, but if you'd like to type out your questions into the chat box, we can come back to them. And I have everyone entering their name and their school district in the chat so that we can use that as attendance. All right, so this is a two-part orientation today. So we'll start with the grant orientation, 45 minutes with a 15-minute Q&A, and then I'll hand it over to Nicole Garden at OSPI for a local procurement training. During the grant orientation section, we will cover the overview of the grant, conditions of the award, key dates to get into your calendar, how to use the WSDA grant portal, requesting reimbursement for food and non-food costs, and then monitoring requirements, as well as how to source Washington foods and information on technical assistance that we provide. So who are we at WSDA? The Washington State Department of Agriculture's Regional Market Program specifically supports small farms who sell directly to their customers, including schools and childcare centers. So by being a part of this grant and choosing to buy local, you can make a huge difference in the livelihoods of small farmers in your community. WSDA's Farm to School program promotes farm to school connections and is dedicated to fostering relationships between schools and agricultural producers in Washington State. We are here to support you in your farm to school connections with training and resources. And of course, we provide the purchasing grants, which is why we're here today. So we want to thank OSPI for their support in grant administration for the first two grant cycles. In this 2023-2025 biennium, for round one and round two, WSDA is offering a total of $4 million in farm to school purchasing grants from the federal COVID recovery funds and from the state general funds. So we're grateful to longtime partners and advocates who have been pushing for this investment for many years. We know that one of the biggest barriers to farm to school purchasing is limited budgets, which is why we're so excited to be able to offer these grants. And we do hope that these grants will help accomplish WSDA's dual goals of expanding opportunities for farmers and increasing access to healthy Washington-grown food for youth in our state. And this is a competitive reimbursement grant. That means you must pay for your products before requesting reimbursement. So first, we want to say congratulations. Thank you for your dedication to Farm to School. This round was very competitive with more than double the amount of funds requested than we had to offer. So a total of 104 grantees have been awarded around $3.7 million in funding. So we're thrilled to offer this additional support for the incredible work that you're all doing in support of Washington producers and to provide healthy, nutritious meals to kids across Washington. So given the large amount of funding requested, we wanted to fund as many eligible applications as possible. So that is why school districts awards are partially funded. Given your partial awards, I wanted to remind you that these are special funds for special foods. So as I mentioned, this grant is meant to support small farmers. It may take a few more steps than making purchases from your distributor, but it makes a huge difference for small farmers' livelihoods. So grantees must remain an active NSLP sponsor for the duration of the grant period. You must also be currently active in SAM and have a unique entity ID and have a statewide vendor number to be reimbursed by WSDA. Also, there are a handful of you that I'm still waiting for your non-food cost reduction spreadsheet. So that's an Excel spreadsheet I sent to you. Just need to know what non-food cost you'd like now that that award has been reduced. So if there are any conditions that you have not met, you have been contacted and will not receive your grant agreement until these things are completed. So for specific questions about your status, please give me a call or email me. So you have been awarded funding for round 1 of the 2023-2025 Farm to School Purchasing Grant. The funding period begins on the date of grant agreement execution. That's when both parties sign the grant agreement, yourself and WSDA. So do not make any purchases before signing the grant agreement, since you will not be reimbursed for them. This grant ends on June 30th, 2025. You might hear about round 2 applications coming out in the spring of 2024. You are not eligible to apply. So this is additional funding for schools that are not part of the current grant round. So again, do not apply for round 2. The award you received is the total funding amount from now until June of 2025. Reimbursement requests are due on the 10th of the month or the Monday following if the 10th falls on a weekend. And you're required to complete a food reimbursement request every month, regardless of whether or not you have made any purchases. So if you have not made any purchases, you will simply answer one question as to why you have not made any purchases and what your plans are to make future purchases. You're also required to complete 3 short grant reports, and the first baseline report is due January 10th alongside your first reimbursement request. And then you'll see the interim report due in 2024 and the final report in 2025. Okay, so your grant award may include funds from both the Coronavirus State and Local Fiscal Recovery Fund, which is CSLFRF, as well as general fund state dollars. So the specific amount from each fund source is stated on your grant agreement face sheet and in the award details section of the Wise Hive grant portal. So the following table lists the specific expenditure period during which you must spend these funds. The date of grant agreement execution, again, is when both parties have signed the grant beneficiary and WSDA. So this means you must budget to spend all of your Award 1 federal funds by December 31st, 2024. So these are not these are use it or lose it funds and will not be rolled over. And proportionately, more of those funds that you were awarded happen to be in the federal award. So make sure you're budgeting to spend down that federal award by December 31st, 2024. All right, and then all reimbursement requests for goods and services received and paid for must be submitted according to the following schedule. So reimbursement requests received after the deadline for that expenditure period will not be reimbursed. I don't know if I pointed this out, but the star shows anything different from last year. So if you're a returning grantee, keep an eye out for those stars. And I wanted to emphasize the key dates by showing you in a different visual way. So let's take a look. So the grant starts upon your grant agreement execution, and it ends in June of 2025. A really important date is December 31st, 2024. That's when the COVID federal funds expire. And so first you have your federal funds, which are the first 13 months of the grant. And another important date is July 1st, 2024. So this is our state fiscal year. This is when anything purchased prior to July 1st, 2024, you would have to let us know and get reimbursed. And then we have the state funds. So award 2 is state funds, and it can start being spent July 1st, 2024, but it will be spent after you finish your federal funds. So anywhere from 6 to 12 months to spend these state funds. And then in addition, in terms of reimbursement requests, like I said, the state fiscal year closeout is important because anything you purchase from now until June 30th, you will have to request 10 days later. If you don't get in your request, we won't be able to continue to reimburse you for those items. And the same goes for the end of the June 2025, is that you have 10 days here. And in addition, one more date is any federal awards that have been spent by December 31st in this timeline, you will need to request by January 10th. So all of this information will have lots of reminders. But if anyone has any questions, please feel free to reach out. And then just one more time, the federal funds, which are 13 months, is actually, we've awarded you more than the time for proportionate for time. So you will have to budget to spend more in the year in 2024 than you will in 2025. All right. I wanted to give you a high-level overview of the Wise Hive grant portal. So this is where you turned in your application, and this is where you will be turning in all of your information for the grant. So for a more detailed walkthrough, we will be going through this in January in our first office hours. The email and password that you use to log in for your application will remain the same throughout the grant period. So you may need to share that information or ensure that the person managing the grant has access to Wise Hive. You can always edit your profile information, which is all of your contact information, your emails, by clicking edit here in the profile. And then you will click active grant here to open up information. And if you are a school district that has summer meals and childcare meals grant, you'll see the multiple cards here. And just so you know, right now, no one has this active grant status. I'm working on that right now. So just be patient with me. I will be doing that soon, and then you'll be able to get into this aspect of the Wise Hive grant portal. So this is what it will look like. You'll have your resource section. So anything I mention in terms of links will always be there, including a recording of this presentation. And then we have our food reimbursement request. This is the section that you will complete every month by the 10th of the month. Like I said, if you are not requesting any food, there's just one question of just having you check in and let us know how things are going. Next, if you requested any non-food costs in your application, this section will have all of those line items ready for you to request. And then finally, your budget modification request. This is where there's a change in non-food costs, then you would go there, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. But make sure you're not buying anything in terms of non-food costs that you have not been pre-approved for. And then finally, the baseline report survey. This is updated now to January 10th. It is due, so you'll click on this and it's just a short survey there. And then if you keep scrolling down, you'll see the awarded section. So if you view your award details, this is where your grant agreement will live. And it also has a really cool section called the grant budget details section. So this is where you can always go to view how much funds you have remaining, how much you have spent, and all of that information. And your application will always live here as well. Please don't edit it, but it's here if you need to view it. Okay, let's dig into food reimbursement. So what kinds of foods can you buy with these funds? You can purchase whole and minimally processed fruits, vegetables, herbs, meats, seafood, legumes, grains, anything that is 100% grown, raised, caught, or foraged in Washington state. And minimally processed means it could mean refrigerated, sliced, diced, frozen, washed, packed, things like that. And you can define local in many ways at your school district, but for the purpose of this grant, local is defined as grown, raised, caught, or foraged in Washington state. As for fully processed foods, such as bread products or dairy, the primary ingredient, which is the largest ingredient by weight or volume, must be 100% grown in Washington. So for example, yogurt containing milk from cows 100% raised in Washington, or pizza dough containing flour from wheat grown 100% in Washington. This is a change from last year when we required 51% of all ingredients in a product to be Washington grown, meaning that not all products approved last year will qualify. So we have made this change to diversify products and encourage grantees to purchase items not already purchased on a regular basis from small and mid-sized food producers. Again, we like to say these are special funds for a special food, and every dollar you spend has value and can support a resilient local food system. It is your responsibility to determine and ensure that the products you request for reimbursement are eligible and meet the requirements. So this new form is the Washington Grown Food Product Verification Form. It's on our website. It's also in the Wise Hive resource section that I mentioned, and it is specific to only this grant. So the form is required for processed foods. Whole foods, farm source, and county are identified on the monthly expenditure report. So if there's some reason we aren't able to verify the farm source of a whole or minimally processed food, there's some cases where we might request the vendor complete this form, but it is required for processed products. So before making a purchase of a processed food item, reach out to your vendor to ensure compliance with the grant rules, and then you'll keep this form in your records and turn it in with each food reimbursement request that has processed foods. So we have already communicated with producers who sold to schools last year, so they should be aware of this change and ready to provide the form. I've reached out to Auburn Dairy, Yummy Yogurt, and Treetop Applesauce to determine if these products qualify for grant reimbursement since they were popular last year. I've not heard back, but I will make an announcement when I do hear back. And just keep in mind the grant purpose for supporting small farmers, it should be really easy for a value-added producer to fill out. For example, a berry producer who makes jam, or a small fermentation company who makes pickles from cucumbers of a neighboring farm would be really simple to fill out. So you can connect me with any producer if they have any issues filling it out. Okay, so eligible food purchases can be purchased from a variety of direct and indirect sources. So direct options include farms, ranches, fisheries, farmers markets, farm stands, and even your own school garden or farm. And of course, you can't buy avocado from a farm stand that gets their avocados from California because that's not grown in Washington. So make sure you're checking on those things. We do highly encourage buying products directly from Washington farmers and food producers. You may also purchase Washington grown foods from grocery stores, other retailers, as well as your prime produce or broadline distributor. So if you are purchasing from an indirect source, be sure that the product or vendor provides information about the original farm source. So so you will have to demonstrate that everything is grown in Washington, and keep your supporting documentation such as product labels, receipts, and invoices with the farm name and address. And as a reminder, you must follow all applicable federal and state procurement rules and regulations when purchasing food for reimbursement with this grant, and that's what Nicole's going to talk about after this. All right, so if you would like to purchase from your school garden and farm and reimburse them with these grant funds, please use a price that is comparable to the market price. So check in at your farmer's market or otherwise to find a comparable price for that product. And if you have any questions about food safety or creating an interagency agreement, you can see these resources and or chat with us or chat with your local health department or OSPI for more information. So once your Washington grown food has been ordered, received, and paid for, you can now start the reimbursement process. So this means that food service directors must communicate with their business offices to ensure accuracy of the date of payment. Remember to only ask for reimbursement for food that was received. So make sure you double check that if all food was not received, you do not claim the original invoice total. You only claim what was received and paid for. So please try to catch these errors before you request reimbursement. So this is showing you again in the WSDA grant portal where you would fill out your food reimbursement request. Here are the steps. So you would log into your WSDA grant portal and complete all of the questions in the form that includes your monthly expenditure report, which is an Excel spreadsheet. And then if you purchased any processed products, you would upload the Washington grown food product verification form. Next, I will review your monthly report to approve expenses. And what I'm looking for there is that the food is grown in Washington. Then we will send you confirmation email with the total approved amount. And then WSDA will send you payment through the statewide vendor payee system. All right. So I'm going to open up the monthly expenditure report and walk through that. The link to the monthly expenditure report is on your WSDA grant portal, and it'll pop up as on the browser on the internet, and then you'll download it into Excel. You'll see here the instruction page is the first tab. Then there's a sample tab, and then there's the actual expenditure report tab. So I'm going to show you the sample tab today. So you'll start here with your contact information. What's really important about this sheet is all of the drop downs. So it makes organizing all of your information so much easier. So please use all of the drop downs where when they show up. So you'll do your organization name, program type, and report month. So the first report month is December 2023. That's due on January 10th. And then you'll see down here, we start with an invoice date. So all of the instructions, you can see this corner here, this red corner. If you hover over the cell, you'll be able to read the instructions. So in this column, you'll enter the invoice date, and the date must be between when the grant agreement was signed by both parties and the end of the grant. So you'll type that in. Then the pay date, if you hover over this, make sure you do not submit this MER until all items are paid and received. And so you'll enter that. Next is the vendor name. So the vendor is who you paid for the product. This year, you will choose from the list of vendors. And you can see here, this is a list of vendors, about 100 vendors that were purchased from last year. So this is not to say that the list is like some sort of approved list. It's just a list out of convenience to keep all of our data standardized. So you can use this by clicking, or you can also just start typing it in and it'll pop up for you. If by chance the vendor is not on that list, you have this extra column to write in a new vendor name. And two important things here also are if you're purchasing directly from a farm, you'll enter this. And if you're purchasing directly from a school garden, you will click here. Okay, so that's vendor, and then farm name. Like I said, this is how we identify that the food was grown in Washington. So you must include the farm name. Again, this is also a drop-down list. There's about 300 Washington farms that were either purchased from last year or mapped out on the Washington Food and Farm Finder. So again, this is not necessarily a list of approved farms. It's just a list of convenience. So go ahead and type in or go through the list. If there's a farm that you don't see on the list, you can add it into this column. And one important note, if there is a processed product that has a list of, multiple farms, which is possible, then you would just enter the C processed product form. So an example, if your school farm is not listed, then of course you could just write it into this column. Next is the county. So this is also imperative. This is how we recognize that the food is grown in Washington, and it's specific to the county where the food was grown. So it's not where the vendor is, it's where the food was grown. And this is also a drop-down list. Next is category. This is a drop-down list. We move over here. Next, we have product specification. So type in the general product name followed by the variety and any other details. For example, carrots that are shredded, or apples that are whole and of Fuji variety. Next is what form did the item come in? So this is a drop down of whole, minimally processed, or fully processed. And so if we see that you choose fully processed, we will be looking out for the processed form. Next is quantity. This is always going to be a number. And unit type. If none of this, the unit types work for you, please just click units. Total pounds, if you have an estimated amount of pounds, that would be great to enter there. And then most important is total price. So that is where you enter your total price that you're requesting. And also we have a just for fun column. So if you want to share how you use the item, that's really exciting. I was actually just on a call with producers yesterday and shared with them how you used your products last year, and they were really excited about really the creative ways that you use products. And new this year is the approval status. So this is where I will edit whether each line item is approved, not approved, or there's information that's missing, and I'll add notes here. So once you upload the monthly expenditure report to your Wise Hive grant portal, it will be in the food reimbursement request form. I will review it, and then I will upload it for you to view with all of these approval statuses filled out. If we scroll down to the bottom, you will see the total requested amount and then the total approved amount. So this is the monthly expenditure report. Please feel free to let me know if you have any questions or any trouble when you're filling it out. I'd be happy to walk you through that. Okay, we're going to head back into the presentation. So in terms of documentation requirements, you are not required to include copies of invoices or receipts when you're submitting your food reimbursement request. However, grantees must retain records of all purchases and supporting documentation to demonstrate expenses meet the Washington Grown requirements to be eligible for reimbursement. So records could be receipts, paid invoices, product labels, anything that indicates the farm source and location. And then, of course, if you have a processed item, that documentation would be the Washington Grown Food Product Verification Form. And very important to note, all records and supporting documentation must be retained for a period of 6 years and be provided to WSDA upon request. So this year we will be performing desk reviews, so please ensure that you have all of your records. So some of you have requested non-food costs, so let's jump into that. So you may only purchase and be reimbursed for non-food costs that have been approved for your organization. So you'll see that in the grant agreement, attachment B. So that's the very last page of your grant agreement. And you'll also see that in Wise Hive. You'll see a list of all of the pre-approved reimbursement requests here. And then when you've made the purchase, you'll go in and request reimbursement. And so once you have your non-food cost, it's been ordered, received, and paid, you can now start the reimbursement process. Again, this is where it is located in Wise Hive. You'll see them listed here. So the steps are to log into Wise Hive, complete all of the questions in the non-food reimbursement request form, And make sure, so all non-food costs require receipt and proof of payment. This is new this year. Proof of payment is an invoice or receipt that shows a balance of 0 and shows the method of payment. Or if you have a sales or order or delivery invoice that shows an amount, but not a balance of 0, then you can either turn in a copy of a cash check, a copy of a screenshot of your bank statement showing that the payment was processed, or proof of a bank wire transfer. And then follows the same steps as food reimbursement requests, where I will review that. Then we will send you confirmation with the total approved amount. And we will send you payment through the statewide vendor payee system. So if you have non-food costs, be sure to include the following information for the specific categories. So I won't dive too much into this, but this is all listed in WiseHive. So if you're requesting transportation, make sure you have trip purpose, mileage, starting ending location, and mileage reimbursement rate. Staff time would be anything that shows hours, pay rate, payroll expenses, description of work. And then for materials and supplies, as well as equipment, it would be a description, quantity, and price, as well as a photo. Then for travel, we're actually working on a travel reimbursement template that will be coming soon. But this is all of the information about lodging, mileage, and meals that you would need to follow. And then some of you have other non-food costs that are often consulting services for third-party farm-to-school services. So that invoice should show the description of services, number of hours, hourly rate, and then if not, could be a flat fee for service. So again, all of this information is required when you do request reimbursement for a non-food cost. If you're requesting equipment over 5,000, there's some additional information. So you're going to need to maintain property records that include all of this information. You will need to conduct a physical inventory once every 2 years to update the property records. Also developing a control system. And there's also specific disposition requirements for when you are done using the equipment. So make sure you follow all of those rules if you have equipment over $5,000. Okay, so lastly, we'll finish off with some more information. So these key dates for reimbursement requests apply for both food and non-food cost reimbursements. So please, if you are submitting both in a month, make sure you do them on the same day or relatively close so that I can get them paid at the same time. You'll receive reimbursement 30 days after an approved invoice. So an approved invoice is after the reimbursement request has been received, reviewed, and approved, then sent to our fiscal department with all required backing documentation. So this is a link to just a reference sheet for all of these key dates to help you out. But again, it is the 10th of the month. So remember that every month you'll have to submit a food reimbursement request just to let us know how you're doing. So I mentioned this earlier, the budget modification form. If you do need to make a change, you'll complete the budget modification request in WiseHive for the following instances. So If all of your non-food costs, so if any of your non-food costs are greater than 20% of the cost shown that you originally requested, so if it's a lot more expensive than you anticipated in your budget, you would complete the budget modification request. If you want to make a new purchase that is not in your grant agreement, then you would need to complete a budget modification request. And also, if for some reason you need to shift around your funds from non-food to food costs. So be sure to fill out this budget modification request first. Do not purchase anything until you have been approved. And again, here it is in the WSDA grant portal. We want to note what is not eligible and will not be reimbursed with these grant funds. So any food that does not meet the Washington grown requirements. So even if you said you're going to buy apples and oranges in your application, those are not grown in Washington, so we will not be reimbursing for those. We also, anything that's made outside of the funding period, please don't start purchasing until both parties have signed your grant agreement. Milk, fluid milk is not eligible for reimbursement. So the reason we exclude milk is to encourage new vendor relationships with the diversity of Washington farms and to incorporate new products beyond what is already commonly purchased. And then as I mentioned, non-food costs have to be already in your grant agreement. So we would not reimburse for anything outside of that unless you went through the budget modification process and were approved. And also any of these programs, products ordered through any of these other programs are not eligible for reimbursement. As I mentioned, we will be having random desk reviews this year. So in your award details that you received in an email and also on WSDA, you'll see what risk level you are. So if you're low risk, you will submit your monthly expenditure reports, keep your supporting documentation for 6 years, and be subject to random desk review. If you are medium risk, you will additionally need to turn in your receipts for your first monthly expenditure report. Then if you're high risk, you will need to submit your receipts for the first 3 monthly expenditure reports. Okay, so we know that grantees have varied experiences when it comes to sourcing local and Washington grown foods. So this slide contains select links to additional resources to help you get started with planning purchases, identifying farm sources, and connecting with other districts or partners engaged in local purchasing activities. A resource we want to highlight is the Washington Food and Farm Finder. So this is a wholesale directory of farms and food producers in Washington State, designed with institutional food service buyers in mind. So this is what it looks like, and you will see a map of lots of farmers, and you can click on different things like what type of food, what type of identity the producer has, how you could type in your zip code for the delivery area. So this is a really great place to get started, the Washington Food and Farm Finder. So one useful resource to help determine what foods are available from Washington farms during different times of the year are the Washington grown seasonality charts. So we have a link here and encourage you to use the seasonality charts to help you plan out purchases between now and the end of the grant period. We also encourage you to reach out to your WSU Extension or your SNAP Ed team to help you think about this, about seasonality. So I'm wondering if anyone has awesome social media, if you want to put it in the chat, that would be fun to share. But yeah, so you're doing amazing work and you're going to be purchasing awesome food and creating amazing meals. So share it with your community. And if you're doing that, we'd love to hear about it, and feel free to tag us and use all of these hashtags so that we can keep on sharing the awesome work that you're doing. So we know that this is a lot of information and you still might have questions or need extra assistance with different aspects of the grant program. We are here to help, and we're happy to have one-on-one support if you want to call me or email me at any time. We will have our first office hours on Friday, January 5th from 9 to 10, and I'll go into a more detailed Wise Hive grant portal demonstration. And then from January, we will pick a monthly office hour time based on the results of the baseline report survey. And yeah, we really enjoy having you at the office hours. It's really a space for peer-to-peer learning. Food service directors can share how it's going, what their menu items are, any challenges they're experiencing. So I hope you can meet us there. And again, we are here for one-on-one support anytime. Not just myself, but Annette Slonim is our farm to school lead, and she'd be happy to sit down with you as well. All right, I know that was a lot to cover, and this is a 2-hour presentation, so if you need a little break, feel free to get up and stretch. And we're gonna start the second half of the program at 3, but for now I'm gonna start looking in the chat for questions. I see a question from Sandy. Payments no longer received on apportionment for CFA. Will all reimbursements be from SLFRF through 12/31/24 and then state funded reimbursements after that, even if SLFRF not fully used? Okay, so that is correct. The payments are no longer received from OSPI apportionment. You'll receive payments from WSDA via your statewide vendor number. And as for your second question, for the CFA, you'll first spend those federal funds, the SLFRF funds, through December 31st, 2024. And then once you've finished spending those award funds, you'll move on to start spending your state funds as long as it's after July 1st, 2024. So I can send out the CFA, the number that is associated with that for sure. I don't have it off the top of my head, but I have that number that you need to enter. And it is COVID funds. So.
And Claire, do they have an understanding of how much they have in federal and how much in state?
Yes, so that's right at the very top of your grant agreement. You see those two things differentiated, the federal and the state award.
Can I jump in real quick?
Yeah.
To clarify on my question too about the CFA, so like one of our grant awards, we've got the 3 different grant awards, and one of them, let's say it's the federal portion is 195,000. If he does not spend all that 195,000 by December 31st, 2024, it just stops and becomes state funded, correct?
No, it's use it or lose it. So if you don't spend it all, you lose that funding
Okay,
by December 31st, 2024.
okay, thank you.
Mhm. Anyone else have any questions? Feel free to unmute yourself. Can you review claim process for staffing? Yes. Sorry, everyone, I'm gonna go back. Okay, so for staffing, so all non-food costs require receipt and proof of payment. So, for staffing, any documentation that shows hours, pay rate, other payroll expenses like taxes, and a description of the work, which is only direct costs, so salary and benefits. So that could be your paychecks, a paycheck stub, expanded general ledger, or timesheets that has all of that information. So you upload that to WiseHive. That makes sense.
I
Hi,
think
I'd like
so,
to,
thank you.
yeah, I would like to ask about that too. Do we need a separate pay stub? Like, if I want to be reimbursed for some hours, do I need to get a separate pay stub for those reimbursable hours?
That's a good question. So the information, if as long as this information is shown, then you're all set. So if whether that's separate or it's maybe included in your expanded general ledger, and it's just specific to whoever's hours it are that are being billed to the grant itself.
Okay.
I see a question. If we overspend our FFVP award, can we use the funds for that program? Overspend that award.
You want a little context, Claire?
Yeah.
So FFBP is specifically for elementary school snacks. And they are awarded a certain allotment for the school year. So they're saying if they have spent all their money up for snacks, are they allowed to continue? Are they allowed to use these funds for snacks as well?
Oh, yeah.
I think, Deborah, is that correct?
Well, if that is correct, yes, you can spend these funds on snack programs, any program that is a school meal program. So the reason we said that those are ineligible is because we don't want you to ask twice. So making sure you keep those separate and not paying for one for food with two different programs. But yes, you can use these grant funds to purchase snacks for your school program. So Angie, your question is kind of specific. So Northport, right? I can't remember if you have signed your grant agreement or not, but if you have not, we can get that fixed before you sign your grant agreement. if, okay, so you've already signed it. Yes, so since you've already signed your grant agreement, you would fill out a budget modification form to get those funds switched to food. So I can follow up with you on that to work it out. But yeah, let me just follow up with you, Angie, on that. That's a specific question. And then let's see. Can we start purchasing now if we've signed the grant agreement? How will we know when WSDA signs? So Julia, the authorized representative for your organization will receive confirmation via DocuSign when the grant agreement is executed. So when WSDA has signed. So that's when you'll know. And you can always reach out to me to just double check as well that your grant agreement has been executed. And you'll also receive an email shortly. I'm working on the active grant portal. So you'll receive an email when everything's all set to go and you'll be able to get in there. So that will be another sign that you're all set to start purchasing. Here's another question from Ha. For staff time and labor costs, does time and effort reporting apply? Can you maybe unmute yourself, Ha, and give me a little bit more details?
Hi, yes. For federal program, time and effort usually apply to any salaries and benefits charged. So does the staff have to sign with their supervisor and such?
Let me get back to you on that. I'm not exactly sure. So let me get back to you and get you an answer for that.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. So we've got 1 minute. I am going to turn it over to Nicole for the OSPI local procurement training. But I want to say congratulations, everyone, for being awarded. It was really competitive this year. So we're so excited to see what you do with these funds in the next 2 years. And feel free to call and email anytime. And like I said, I'm still working on the active grant portal, so you'll see that coming soon in an email. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you everyone for being here, and thanks, Claire. I just want to introduce myself really quickly. Hello, if you don't know me, my name is Nicole Garden, and I'm a Farm to Child Nutrition Program Specialist here with the Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction. And with me today is my colleague in Farm to Child Nutrition Program Efforts, Adriana Gutierrez, and we are going to take the next 45 minutes to discuss local procurement. I know, so exciting. So we're going to start talking about values-based, because this is mostly values and locals-based procurement, because your community and school's values really is important when it comes to local. So when buying food, we unconsciously use a set of values that determine our purchasing. These values include the issues such as quality, cost, convenience, and origin of food, labor involved in the production, food safety, production practices, distribution, economic impact, and sustainability, to name a few. By taking the time to develop and communicate which values motivate your school nutrition program's purchasing decisions has several benefits. It helps frame food program decisions. It helps simplify daily decisions and shift through the multiple purchasing options available. And it creates a shared vision and open communication among school nutrition administration, teachers, and parents, and also students. I really encourage districts to use the Farm to School Values-Based Local Procuring Worksheet that was created by the Vermont Feed to help you identify your district's food values, what program considerations and logistics impact your purchasing, and how these factors determine your goals towards local, regional, and values-based purchasing. You can use this worksheet as you engage parents, students, kitchen staff, school health professionals, school board members, and school administrators to help identify your district's values. I encourage you to also engage your district's wellness policy committee or advisory group. If your district does not have a wellness group, start one. They're really critical to moving these kind of things forward. So now we'll go into what is considered local. So in your procurement policy, your district should define what local means to you. Definitions can vary widely depending on the unique geography and climate where a school is located and the abundance of local food producers and manufacturers in your area. Schools can define local within a county, as within a certain number of miles, or within the state. But for this grant, it can only be used for Washington grown foods as per the definition that Claire provided earlier. Having specific goals and values identified as it applies to your local purchasing efforts will help you craft a definition for local that works in service with your goals. What you define as local can frame who you purchase from, how those products are grown, and where your funds are going. For example, if you are trying to support small producers, you might adopt a definition for local that includes limitations on farm size, or if you are trying to get as much local product into your cafeteria as possible, you might consider a broad definition of local that includes surrounding states in the region. While the Washington grown exemption provides, we'll talk about the Washington grown exemption soon, and we'll go into a little bit more details. So I mentioned before embedding your community and district's values into your wellness policies, but did you know that they can be a great tool for farm to school programming? Local school wellness policies are intended to guide school districts' efforts to establish school environments that support healthy eating and physical activity and can empower communities to take an active role in the health of their children. Local purchasing goals and commitments are relevant components of a school district's wellness policy. Incorporating farm to school goals and commitments into school and district policies, building in farm to school priorities in your wellness policies goes a long way in sustaining your farm to school efforts. Now and in the future, especially when it is driven by community input. It can ensure that the work continues over time and makes a statement that farm to school is a priority in your district. Community input from wellness committees or advisory councils can build buy-in for local food purchasing, school gardens, and other farm to school activities at the district administrator level. Wellness policies can help to inform district procurement policies as well. Ensuring local food purchasing allowances are included in your district's procurement policies is essential in farm to school programming. OSPI will be releasing a new reference sheet called Wellness Policy as a Tool for Farm to School that includes model language to help districts integrate local purchasing and other farm to school activities into their wellness policy. And it will break it up by the wellness policy requirements. So look for that. So what is procurement? Procurement rules and regulations are important to ensure program benefits and taxpayer dollars are received by schools and the children in those schools. They are also important to ensure program benefits and your tax dollars are used effectively and efficiently. Most everything we do begins with planning. The first step includes planning, forecasting, and budgeting. Planning your procurement, asking the questions what, where, how much, and when. Next, draft your specifications. This component of procurement is especially important when it comes to local purchasing. Today, we will discuss how to craft your specifications in a way that supports the procurement of local foods. Soliciting quotes. The soliciting process will vary depending on the aggregate value of your purchase. We will go into the various purchasing thresholds today. Awarding the contract. Award the contract to the most responsive and responsible bidder based on your specifications and best practices. Managing the contract. Once the contract is awarded and signed, the procurement process is not over. Monitoring and managing the contract is an ongoing process. Continue to manage the contract to ensure everything is provided according to your specifications and contract terms. This is an area where the food service director and the business manager can work together. So forecasting and planning is an essential part of any meal program. However, if you want to add local products to your menu, it is even more important to plan. Not only is it important to communicate with vendors and producers the types and volumes of products that will be needed as early as possible to allow producers the time to grow the crops and raise the livestock so they're available when you need them. Forecasting and planning go a long way in identifying specific food items that you want to purchase locally early and will help you narrow down your specification. Procurement thresholds are based on the aggregate value of a purchase. The aggregate value is the sum of all costs that are paid for goods and services required to satisfy a need over a period of time. This would include all purchases of similar products during the same fiscal year across the entire district. That being said, districts can identify a specific variety of the same product, same type of product, sorry. For example, when purchasing apples, a district could release a specific bid solicitation to target gala apples. And instead of conducting a procurement to obtain a single supplier for all, instead of conducting a procurement to obtain a single supplier for all apples for the school year. Additionally, districts with special menu offerings, such as Harvest of the Month or a seasonal special, can justify a separate bid to make a one-time purchase for the product. So for example, if a district's procurement policy indicates that they will buy seasonal produce items for local sources weekly or monthly for a Harvest of the Month program or seasonal cycle menu, the aggregate value is the total dollar amount of the purchase of that Harvest of the Month product. So I've said this word a lot, a specification. So what is a specification? A specification is actually part of a solicitation, and a solicitation outlines the following. It has an introduction, which includes the type of procurement. It will include your local goals and your preferences. Then goes into the actual specification, which is a general description of goods and services. It includes a description of the product desired, the timeline and procedure, that would include deadline for bids, a contract award date, pre-meeting bids. Then technical requirements. This section outlines the criteria for a responsible and responsive vendor. Those components typically include delivery, food safety, and insurance requirements. Then finally is the evaluation criteria. This typically is only required with formal procurements. However, if you wish to add a geographic preference into your solicitation, that would go in the evaluation criteria. And we'll talk about all these components here now. So while local cannot be used in your specifications, it can be used in your introduction. So your interest in purchasing local can be expressed in that introduction to solicitation. And one thing to note is that the school cannot specify that it wants only local products in the introduction language, but it can say that what you desire to have. And a school may indicate its desire to serve local products and just really emphasize its importance of farm to school. So things like what you identified in your values can be articulated in your local introduction statement, as well as your definition of local can be included in your value statement and things like that. So now that we've introduced vendors to your organization, how do we tell our potential bidders that what we want? We write food specifications. Food specifications tell bidders exactly what you want, and bidders must meet these requirements for their bid to be considered. If you are trying to procure local products specifically, you should include language in your specifications that identify qualities you expect from a local farm or vendor. Here are some examples. Particular varieties unique to the region. So if I'm in Walla Walla County and I issue a solicitation for Walla Walla sweet onions, chances are I'm gonna get it from a local vendor. USDA also has specific grading standards for foods such as fresh fruits and vegetables, processed fruits and vegetables, poultry, eggs, livestock, and meat and dairy products. These grades can be helpful since they provide a common language that both producers, vendors, and buyers can use to have a clear picture of what the consumer wants and what the vendor has available. It is predictable and measurable. It can go a long way in ensuring vendors are accountable. Keep in mind, small to mid-sized growers are likely not to grade their products. So you don't have to request a specific grade. Try spelling out the specification of a grade. The link in this slide, when you receive at the end, will link to the various grade descriptions per USDA. They're super helpful and I really encourage you to use them. Condition is another component to consider crafting your solicitation. Condition refers to a degree of soundness or preservation of a product that includes, but is not necessarily limited to, its firmness or stages of ripeness, decay, shriveling, and any other progressive factor which affects its marketability. Freshness, requiring a product to be delivered 48 hours of harvest serves a dual purpose. You get really fresh produce and you also increase the chances that the product will be local. You can also include the size of the farm. You can limit the size of the farm you'd like to see food come from. So 5 acres, 10 acres, that is allowable. Farm practices. You can require specific farm practices are utilized, such as crop rotation or integrated pest management practices. This also helps reduce the size of the farm in some ways because it's likely that a small farmer would be utilizing these methods more so than a large farmer. Harvest techniques. You can require that crops be harvested by hand. Crop diversity. Farms that raise it. You can say, I want to work with a farm that both grows carrots and raises pigs. And so you can get, you can say that because again, likely a large farm is not going to be doing those things. Origin labeling. If you're developing a contract with a distributor, you can require that they include farm of origin or county of origin labeling, which is really important in this grant because it has to be Washington grown. Values-based certifications like certified organic, no-till, pesticide-free, grass-fed, and cage-free are also, you also are able to use those. And lastly, if you'd like farm visits or class visits or assembly visits, you can also put that in your specifications. That could either go here or in that technical requirements section, depending on if you want it non-negotiable or not. If you have flexibility with that request, you would put it in your specifications. But if you definitely wanted that as a component of your solicitation, then you would put it in your technical requirements. Oops, this slide got switched around. Sorry about that. Speaking of technical requirements, so food safety, these are some components of technical requirements that you might want to include. Again, these are non-negotiable. So these are things that in order to be a responsive bidder, they would need to meet. So that could be delivery. You could indicate any delivery requirements such as number of deliveries desired, preferred dates or time, and then whether or not you have multiple sites you'd like them to deliver to, or if you are willing to do on-farm pickup. Insurance. Indicate what type of insurance you need the producer to carry and what amount they need to be insured to. Food safety. It's in your best interest to ensure producers you work with follow good food safety practices. Be sure to include your organization's food safety requirements in your solicitation. Indicate what types of food safety verifications you will accept. For example, good agricultural practices certification, good handling practices, on-farm food, or will you just be able to take an on-farm food safety plan? Keep in mind that good agricultural practices, also known as GAP certification, is quite expensive, and so it can be cost prohibitive to small farmers. So another option is this on-farm food safety plan. If you go to this last bullet, checklist for retail purchasing of local fresh produce, that is a set of questions you can ask the farmer that you want to work with if they do not have any kind of food safety certifications, just to make sure that you know that you can be assured that they're following safety practices. And even if you're targeting local foods, the Buy American provision still needs to be included in your technical requirements. And then again, any additional requests that you'd like field trips to farms, ranches, classrooms, or assembly presentations, or even recipes, you can include. Again, if it's a this is the part you would want to include in technical requirements if it was non-negotiable. If you are willing to, if that's just a preference, not a requirement, you can include that in your specifications. I'm going to go back here because I think this was flipped, so I apologize. So now that you know that a district can specify a variety of the same product, how do you know what's available when? Claire touched on this a little bit. To help you get started with identifying your potential local foods, you could add to your menu, check out the Washington Grown Seasonality charts from WSDA, and also check with your local extension office, because they will know what varieties are particular to your area, because the you know, what grows on the east side and what grows on the west side are very different sometimes, so they can give you specific information for your area. All right, so sometimes it's hard to level that playing field from purchasing from a local farm versus a large distributor. So another tool in your tool belt would be the use of geographic preference. Geographic preference allows you to prioritize locally grown agricultural products without listing local in your specification. Currently, listing local in your specification, again, is not allowed, although it was part of a proposed rule from USDA, so it could be allowed in the future. Wouldn't it be nice to just say, I want local food, here's my definition of local, instead of having to do this workaround? But for now, this is the workaround. Sponsors may apply a geographic preference to their evaluation criteria section of their solicitation when procuring unprocessed, locally grown, or locally raised agricultural products. USDA has defined unprocessed as unprocessed or minimally processed agricultural products that retain their original characteristics. And this applies to peeled, sliced, diced, cut, chopped, shucked, ground, dried, washed, packed products. It does not apply to any products that have been cooked, heated, or canned, or that have additives or filters. So you can apply geographic preference in different ways. By dollar value, such as giving pennies off the quoted price. Again, this is in the evaluation section. And so this is not required in a micro or small procurement. And we're going to go into what those are in just a moment. This would be an added preference point. You could also, or preference pennies, you can also give added preference points. And then you can also give a percentage off the price. So again, this is just a component when you're doing that evaluation. How can you level the playing field is through these preferences. So when utilizing geographic preference to procure such products, sponsors will need to use their definition of local. And the definition should be tied to the agricultural product, not the location of the respondent. For example, if the vendor is located in Vancouver, Washington, but the product was grown in Oregon, if your definition of local is Washington State, like it is for this grant, the vendor would not be responsive. So here's an example of targeting local with food specifications, two different ways. So the first example is a solicitation for geographic preference. So while it goes and it describes, this is actually language taken from that, from the grading, from the USDA grading. So it says mature per pairs, fresh, whole. They want mature, ripe, well-formed fruit, free from blemishes, bruises, scars, and insect injury. It talks about the size. Instead of grading the size, it actually goes into detail of the size. And it says must be from the 2023 harvest. This would probably be for this season, and that's if not sourced from the previous season. Here's the geographic preference information. Preference given to pears grown within a 200-mile radius of Olympia, Washington, is 5% of available 5% of available points will be awarded to bids that meet this geographic preference. So in this context, they have said they have provided the specifications, and then this preference piece it would be in the evaluation section, and would provide that 5% allowance. For the bottom example, this is just using the specifications. So this is without geographic preference. So well trimmed, free from decay, insects, discolored leaves, wilting or damage for kale, for dino kale. Notice how they specified the type of kale is dino, which is actually a type. They also said that they wanted delivered within 48 hours of harvest. So for this example, this would all be in the specification. There would be no need to have an evaluation section if you were working with the micro or small purchase. So we're going to do a quick knowledge check to see how you're doing, because this is a lot of information. So first one is, what is the aggregate value of a purchase? So we mentioned this before, aggregate value of the purchase helps you determine what threshold you're going to use. And since we're about to talk about thresholds, what a great time. If you want to put that in the chat and I'll look through it. Let's see, does anybody have any answers here? Aggregate value of a purchase. And I'm going to go ahead and, for sake of time, I'm going to proceed. So the answer to that is the sum of all costs paid for goods or services required to satisfy a need over a period of time. So, so if the reason for this is program operators may use micro purchasing when the aggregate cost is less than your district micro purchase threshold when making purchases of similar products. The total cost of a transaction or occurrence in which goods, services, or money is exchanged between two or more entities. So again, why this is important is coming up next. So why is knowing the aggregate value important when targeting local foods? Again, I'm going to advance for sake of time. Because you can justify making a separate bid to make a one-time purchase for that product. So again, when you are able to say dino kale instead of just kale, you are able to reduce the aggregate value, because that solicitation is only for the dino kale, not kale in general, not for fruits and vegetables in general, only dino kale. And so that justifies making a separate purchase aside from kale or fruits and vegetables. All right, next question is, what language cannot be included in a specification that can be listed as a preference? Anyone know? Oh, I see Jessica's on it. Yes, that's correct. Local is the answer. And this is yet, because as I told you, USDA's proposed a rule allowing it as a specification. And once that rule has been finalized, hopefully, we will let you know as soon as possible and let you know what the implications of that to the geographic preference is. So next question, a child care center can, oh, sorry, this is a wrong one. Sorry, a school district can use geographic preference in a solicitation for whole grain rolls to prioritize bakers who use Washington wheat. Is that true or false? The answer is false, because whole grain rolls are considered a processed product. They are cooked. That's one thing, and then they're added with other products. So therefore, they cannot be procured using geographic preference. All right, so now we're going to go into procurement thresholds, and this is important. Then that's the reason why we talked about aggregate value. So child nutrition program sponsors are required to follow regulations addressing the procurement of supplies, food, equipment, and other services with program funds. Procurement requirements ensure that food and supplies and services are obtained efficiently, economically, and in compliance with all applicable procurement laws. Conducting full and open competition is the first principle. Having a strong understanding of federal regulations is key to being able to procure goods and services for various child nutrition programs with confidence and ensure you are getting the best products at the best price. And I'm not sure how many of you guys are business offices here and how many are food service directors, but note that there is part of the finalized rules, the program integrity rule, is that food service directors are also going to have to be aware and take these trainings too. So it's good information to know regardless. So regulations require that all purchases made by schools, whether funded wholly or in part with child nutrition program funds, comply with all federal, state, and local procurement requirements. It is important to understand that federal rules do have a purpose, and while they may seem rigid, they do allow for some flexibility and innovation to ensure that schools are receiving goods and services that meet the school's needs at the best price. So there are 3 procurement methods: micro, small, and formal. There are 3 procurement thresholds: federal, state, and sponsor or local threshold. The different thresholds are based on federal, state, and local policies. Sponsors must choose the most restrictive. Here, the sponsor threshold column is blank because each sponsor can choose to have the same threshold as the state or an even more restrictive threshold. The exception is the RCW that allows public schools who purchase Washington-grown food to be exempted from formal procurement. So the $74,999 becomes $249,999, the same as the federal threshold. So it is to your advantage to purchase locally because you can increase that small purchase threshold. And one thing what that means is that you need to complete small purchases procedures and obtain quotes from 3 or more qualified vendors for your Washington-grown food purchases, if it's over $10,000 or your district's micro purchase threshold. Please note this is only for common schools. So if you're a private school, you would follow the federal threshold. This is the RCW that allows for Washington-grown food is the only exception to conducting formal bid procedures. Since we were talking about buying Washington-grown foods today, this exception will be helpful in increasing your local purchases without having to conduct formal procurement processes. Oh, yeah, that's just saying that that federal threshold applies to public schools. So once you have to establish your definition of local, let's see where they can be integrated into your policies and procedures. Because in order to utilize any of those other allowances and exemptions, you're going to need to make sure they're embedded in your policies and procedures. So policies are adopted by the school board and define what the board intends or requires of the administration, while procedures, on the other hand, are left to administrative discretion in both design and implementation. You can add your definition of local in either written, you could add your definition of local in either written document, in either of the written documents. It just depends on your district's preference and policies. Value statements can also be embedded in procedures. For example, purchasing items from women or minority-owned farms with certain environmental standards can be added. It is important that your definition of local does not hinder full and open competition. And so I just wanted to show you that WSSDA has some policy examples and procedures examples that include the allowance of Washington-grown food. So they could be really helpful. I believe that also includes something we're about to talk about, which is increasing the micro purchase threshold. So right here, we're gonna look at an example from Bellingham School District. So here, what they did is they defined local for this purpose as a tiered system where Whatcom County, which is where the Bellingham School District is the priority area. Skagit County, which is a neighborhood county, is the secondary area, followed by the rest of Washington State. For when items are not available from the priority or secondary area, all areas may be within the definition of local for geographic preference purchases, though more points will be awarded for food sourced from the priority area. So that is a pretty amazing procurement procedure example, just because it is very detailed. While it doesn't say how many points that it will allow, for preference points it will allow, it does explain that that's the process. So we really encourage you to be as specific as possible in your procedures, just so we can make sure that what you're doing now can be sustained in the future by if there was another food service director coming in or another administrator. So now that you know what procurement is, let's apply it to buying local. Micro purchases are the aggregate totals of similar purchases. Quotes are not required for micro purchases, and prices must be considered reasonable, and you must document how you determine the prices to be reasonable. That can be based on research, purchase history, or experience, or some other method. Micro purchases must be spread equitably among suppliers or vendors for compliance with full and open competition requirements. It is important to document all procurement and purchasing decisions. Remember, sponsors cannot arbitrarily divide purchase to fall below the small purchase threshold. And the reason why I didn't call out what the micro purchase threshold is because we're going to talk about how you can increase it. But if your procurement policies and procedures do not explicitly state that you have increased it and you do not meet the requirement, then it is up to $10,000. So you can add information to how you can determine a reasonable price determination can be done multiple ways. You can add information to your POs or requisition forms that reads, we determine these prices to be reasonable based on, and then the examples are research, history, or experience or other. You can order a stamp for this information, which was suggested by Barb Rogstad, our procurement specialist. And you can also create a list of vendors you anticipate using for your micro purchases for the year and note how you determine the prices to be reasonable. Again, based on research, experience, or even an internet search is an allowable way. Be sure to sign and date your documentation. So here we go. Did you know that you could increase your micro purchase threshold to up to $40,000? There are two pathways to increase your threshold by self-certifying your district as a low-risk auditee. Option one is that you meet the criteria for a low-risk auditee, and option two is an annual risk assessment. In order to qualify as a low-risk auditee using the option stated previously, using the low-risk auditee, according to you would look at the district's most recent audit, and you must meet the criteria that is defined in CFR 200-520. The auditor will make the determination as to whether or not the auditee qualifies as a low-risk auditee. And you can find the determination in the single audit report under identification of major federal programs in section 1, summary of auditor's results of the schedule of findings and question costs. So one thing is, if you don't know where to find your audit report, you can check with your business office or check with the Federal Audit Clearinghouse, which is linked here, to see what that states. And then the second option is mostly for districts who either did not qualify as a low-risk auditee on their audit, or who don't receive a single audit at all because they don't receive over $750,000 in federal funds. Without a single audit to verify your district is a low risk, districts must perform an annual internal risk assessment. To qualify under this option, the assessment must demonstrate the district is low risk. Management process of identifying risk and rating the likelihood. Sorry, this is a little disjointed. The districts must perform this self-certification at the start of each school year. If the district chooses to increase the threshold, the procurement policy must be updated to reflect the increase and whether it's based on a low-risk auditee status or self-assessment. Policies must be updated and approved prior to using the increased threshold. So one thing I've seen on some the procurement policies is just saying that because they don't want to because districts don't want to redo them over and over again. I've seen folks just put that they will either meet the criteria for low risk oddity or do an annual risk assessment and it indicates that they will only apply that increase if one of those applies. So that means that if they don't apply, then they can't use them. But it's good to have direct language, but if you wanted to put something in that is longstanding where you don't have to update your policy, your procedures all the time, I'm sorry, your policy all the time, then that is the route to go. And I believe we might have an example of that. And then, no, I can show you an example of that. I'll have to pull one up if you're interested. So you just reach out. I'll give my email here in a little bit. So while you cannot intentionally divide purchases to keep them below a particular threshold, just to avoid having to obtain quotes or conduct that formal procurement, did you know you can split a procurement in limited situations? There are many legitimate reasons to issue separate bid solicitations. It is typical for a school to divide purchases based on inherent differences in foods, such as we said, such as shelf life, delivery methods, seasonality, and other characteristics. In the case of local procurement programs, if the school has a special menu offering, again, such as Harvest of the Month or seasonal special, again, that justifies a separate bid to make a one-time purchase for that product. This type of purchasing practice might improve the quality and economic feasibility of a program. And in this instance, the split would not be considered arbitrary action. For example, when purchasing fruits and vegetables, a district could release a specific bid solicitation to target Laciano kale, not Dino this time, instead of conducting a procurement to obtain a single supplier for all fruits and vegetables for the school year. Another example is if a district would be purchasing $250,000 worth of lettuce for the salad bar for the entire year. The procurement cannot be arbitrarily split in two purchases of $125,000 each. However, the school can specify different varieties of lettuce that must be provided and may make the award to more than one supplier using a lump sum award for each variety of lettuce. They may award a contract to one supplier or more than one supplier by defining the lump sum groups in the solicitation. Such as all schools located in a geographic area that's defined. So districts with special menu offer, so if you struggle to justify the division of a purchase, it should not be split. Now let's turn our attention to the last key concept we will cover. To be considered responsive, a vendor must submit a response to a solicitation that conforms to all material terms and conditions of the solicitation. For example, if you say you want apples and the vendor comes back with a bid for peaches, they're not responsive. Or if you require delivery to 5 sites and the vendor can only service 2, they're not responsive. To be considered responsible, a vendor must be capable of performing successfully under the terms and conditions of the contract. For example, if you require that responders provide delivery to your multiple sites, but they can't, then they're not considered responsible. All right. So we're going to talk about small purchases procedures a little bit more. If the aggregate value of your purchase exceeds $10,000 or your district's micro purchase threshold, but is under $250,000, your procurement falls under small purchase procedures. Small purchases require obtaining price or rate quotes from an adequate number of qualified vendors. You will need to document all requests and responses. You should create a detailed solicitation and create a specification that helps you justify those local purchases through the addition of value and local language that we discussed earlier. Small purchases require obtaining price or rate quotes from an adequate number of qualified vendors, and keep in mind OSPI considers 3 quotes adequate. However, if you're unable to find 3 vendors who can be responsive to your specifications, just document your search attempts. Remember, this could be up to $250,000 if requesting quotes for Washington grown food. All right, another knowledge check. True or false? Documentation is not required for informal procurements. An informal procurement would be a micro purchase or a small purchase. Specifically a micro purchase. False. Sponsors must document how you determine the prices to be reasonable for micro purchases as well as small purchases. Allowable reasons can be based on research, historical purchases, or experience. All small informal procurements must be documented as well. So Apple Lane School District wants to raise the micro purchase threshold for Washington grown foods to $40,000. What are some steps they need to take to self-certify to raise their threshold? Again, for time purposes, I'm just going to move on. So we talked about that. So a single audit that identifies them as a low risk auditee or an internal risk assessment. Apple Lane School District wants to purchase all of their Harvest of the Month products from a food hub. They estimate the cost of their produce for the year will be $125,000. What procurement threshold should they use and why? Anyone have any idea? Small purchase method because the aggregate value is over $10,000. Now this is only true well, actually it would be true either way. So when the aggregate value or estimate cost exceeds your micro purchase threshold, you would use the small purchase method to request quotes from qualified vendors. Qualified in this case means vendors who sell what you need, what you want or need. If you want to purchase local produce, you wouldn't request a quote from a beef producer. Write a couple of specifications, contact 2 or 3 food hubs, and request quotes on the produce you wish to purchase. Be sure to give the same information to each food hub or vendor when contacting by phone or email. Wait a reasonable amount of time for them to respond and document all responses as well as no response, noting the dates. Select the food hub or other vendor who offers the best prices that also meet your specification. And remember, document all decisions. So this one asks, what are sponsors required to do? I think we just went through that. Develop written specifications, obtain and document 3 quotes, and choose the food hub with the lowest price or best quote. So when is splitting similar procurements not allowable? Splitting procurements is not allowed when you have already found a farmer you want to buy from, you don't want to get 3 quotes, and when you don't want to do a formal procurement. So again, I always say if you can't justify it, then you shouldn't be splitting it. So other things to consider is for product formulation statements, although you will be collecting for processed products, although you will be collecting the forms from WSDA to verify that the primary ingredient is Washington grown, you will also have to prove that you will also have to get a product formulation statement. It is required of all processed products, regardless of local, that are not listed in the food buying guide. They could have a CN label, but it's very doubtful that a local producer is going to have or a local processor is going to have a CN label. So make sure to review the product documentation reference sheet from OSPI linked here, as well as the product formulation statement templates that need to be used are directly on USDA's FNS website linked here as well. And then I've also provided our reference sheet that has some tips for accepting product documentation. But again, if you need help and support with this, please reach out to your program specialist. They can be really helpful in determining how to get this information. And then using food from the garden. If your school district or school has a garden and you want to source food from that garden, that is totally allowable in the National School Lunch Program. One thing that we do ask you to consider is thinking about an interagency or intergovernmental agreement that just is an agreement between you and the school garden that kind of outlines how much you're going to pay for the product. That way it's easier to justify in the end. But you will also have to maintain the following documentation for 3 years, plus the year in which that you're sourcing that. So what foods were grown and used, the dates foods were harvested, the quantity harvested, and receipts for any garden supplies purchased. That's only that would only be if you're not paying for the food itself. If you're paying for the gardening supplies but not for the crops, you can't pay for both, unfortunately. But keep in mind that there's an asterisk here because per grant rules for these grants, you must maintain the records for 6 years after the grant closes. So keep that in mind. And finally, here are some procurement resources for you. The last bullet is the self-certification resources. If your school, again, does not have a single audit, did not get a single audit, and you still want to self-certify to raise your micro purchase threshold, these 3 links can be super helpful. There's that. I knew there was an example somewhere. So that Lake Stevens School District example is the one I was referencing that included just overview of what their process was if they qualify for a low risk auditee. But both the OFM, Office of Financial Management, and the State Auditor's Office have some great tools as well to determine that. And as always, you can always reach out to Barb Krogstad, our procurement specialist, who is so helpful and knowledgeable and will help you guys out. So I just wanted to point out that there are other sources of local foods available to Washington State school districts. One of those is through our food distribution program. Hopefully you have already ordered your local food for schools foods from our FDP system. I believe either today or tomorrow is the second ordering period. Really exciting program helping to make local easy. Also, we have our supply chain assistance funds. There's been 3 rounds provided so far. You needed to opt into that 4th round of supply chain assistance funds by earlier this year. Or I'm sorry, this month, and we should be providing more information around that soon. And then just keep in mind that all of the supply chain assistance fund, every single round, must be spent by June 30th of 2024. And this is a little different from the communication we were providing before, but our fiscal office did inform us that that we do have to require them to be spent by the end of this year. So if you need help spending those funds, think about spending them locally. And if you need any help or support doing that, please let me know. And how can you reach me? Here's my information, as well as our procurement specialist, Barb Krogstad's information. And I'm always willing to sit in one-on-one and talk about local food procurement, talk about farm to school in general. Please reach out. And right now I'm going to take a break or not take a break. I'm going to open it up for questions. So if anyone has questions over the lot of information I provide you, please let me know. And again, if you don't feel comfortable asking those questions now, you can always reach out to me. Or we can give you back, what, 10 minutes? All right, well, hearing no questions, I will turn it back to you, Claire.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. I took attendance by when you wrote your name in the chat. So if you didn't do that yet, that would be really helpful. But thank you all so much. Excited to work with you going forward, and always reach out to myself or Annette here at WSDA if you have any questions about the grant. Have a good afternoon, everyone.
Oh, real quick, I did see Paul Harris ask, will you be sending this out for all for the PowerPoint? And I believe the answer is that you're going to put it on the website.
Yes. We will send it out. It'll also be in the WSDA grant portal.
And I will say within the next couple of weeks, our website is going to be updated, and there will be some new resource sheets, including one about local procurement that will cover these topics.
Thanks, everyone.